I want you to think about something for a second. Think about the last time you were somewhere completely cut off from the rest of the world and you realized that if something went wrong, no one would know, no one would come. That feeling, that specific gut level feeling, that's where this story starts. I was 26 years old when my buddy Jason talked me into a kayaking trip off the coast of Maine. Just the two of us, 3 days, a small island about 4 miles offshore called Miller's Point. It wasn't a popular spot. No rangers, no tourists, no cell service. That was kind of the whole appeal. Jason had been there once before with his uncle, said it was the most peaceful place he'd ever been. Tall pines, a rocky shoreline, a freshwater stream cutting through the middle. We packed light. 2 tents, food for 4 days, a hand-crank weather radio, and a basic first aid kit. The first day was perfect. We made landfall around noon, set up camp near the tree line, and spent the afternoon exploring the island. It was maybe 40 acres total, small enough to walk the entire perimeter in under 2 hours. We found an old fire pit near the southern end, clearly used before, and some rusted tin cans half buried in the dirt nearby. Jason said his uncle mentioned other kayakers used the island occasionally. Nothing strange about that. We ate dinner as the sun went down, talked about nothing important, work, old friends, whatever. The kind of conversation you only really have when you're somewhere quiet enough to actually hear yourself think. We turned in around 10. I remember lying in my tent, listening to the water hit the rocks and thinking, yeah, this is worth it. This is exactly what I needed. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of Jason unzipping my tent. He didn't say anything at first, just crouched there at the entrance with his flashlight pointed at the ground. And the look on his face? I'd known Jason since we were kids, and I had never seen him look like that. Like he was trying to stay calm and failing at it. He told me there was a boat anchored about 100 yards offshore, no lights running, just sitting there in the dark. I told him it was probably just someone anchored for the night. Happens all the time on the water. He said, yeah, maybe. But then he told me the rest of it. He'd gotten up to use the bathroom, and on his way back he'd seen a light on the boat. Not a running light. A flashlight or a lantern, something handheld, moving around below deck. And while he was standing there watching it, the light went out, and then he heard something splash in the water between the boat and the shore. We stood at the edge of the tree line for a long time just listening. The water was calm that night, barely any wind, and I heard it, a low, rhythmic sound, like something moving through the water at a slow, deliberate pace. Not a fish, not a bird. It had a pattern to it. We killed our flashlights and went back into the trees. Here's what you have to understand. There was no calling for help. The weather radio only picked up NOAA broadcasts. Our kayaks were pulled up on the North Beach, which meant whoever was coming in from the south would hit our campsite before we'd have any chance to reach the water. We had no signal flares, no air horn. Jason had a folding knife. I had a hatchet I'd brought for firewood. That was it. We made a decision fast. We grabbed what we could carry, food, water, the radio, our emergency gear, and moved deeper into the island. There was a rocky outcropping near the center, elevated with a natural wall of boulders on 2 sides. We'd spotted it on our hike the day before, high ground, defensible. We could see the campsite from part of it if we got up high enough. We sat there in the dark for what felt like hours. At some point, Jason grabbed my arm. He pointed toward the camp. There was a light moving through it. Someone was going through our things, methodically, slowly, tent to tent, taking their time. I watched the light stop at my tent for a long time. Then it moved toward Jason's tent. Then it went dark again. I don't know who was on that island with us. I don't know what they were looking for or what they would have done if they'd found us in those tents. What I do know is that we stayed on that rock until the sky started going gray. We didn't sleep. We didn't talk. We barely moved. When we finally came down at first light, we went straight to the North Beach, put those kayaks in the water, and we paddled. We didn't look back for the first half mile. When I finally did, the island was already shrinking behind us. The boat was gone. Back at camp, what was left of it? Our food bags had been opened. Not ripped open, opened carefully, like someone was looking inside them. A dry bag I kept my wallet and cards in had been moved. My wallet was still there, but it had been unzipped. Jason's tent had been gone through, his backpack turned over. The police report went nowhere. No description, no boat registration, no witnesses. An officer told us there had been a few incidents in that area over the years, campers reporting strange encounters on the smaller islands. He said it casually, like it was just background noise, like it wasn't the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. If Jason hadn't woken up, if he hadn't looked out toward the water at exactly the right moment, we would have been in those tents asleep, completely helpless while a stranger walked right through our camp in the dark. I don't go to uninhabited islands anymore. I don't think I ever will. And honestly, if you're the kind of person who thinks that kind of trip sounds like a good idea, I'd really think twice, because the appeal of being somewhere nobody can find you cuts both ways. Nobody could find us either. If you've ever been somewhere so remote that your phone shows no signal, no bars, nothing, and you realize that if something goes wrong, nobody is coming for you, then you already understand the kind of fear I'm talking about. This happened 3 summers ago. I was 26, working a seasonal job with a small environmental research team out of Oregon. Our assignment was simple on paper. Spend 5 days on a privately owned island off the coast of Washington State near Neah Bay, cataloging plant growth and water quality along the shoreline. Small team, 4 people total, 1 motorboat, 1 sat phone, and a supply of food to last us the week. The island wasn't on most maps. That's not an exaggeration. It was so small and so far from the main shipping routes that it barely had a name. The company that owned it used it for occasional research and nothing else. No permanent structures, except a single weathered cabin near the center of the island stocked with basic equipment and bunk beds. We arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The boat ride out took almost 2 hours, and by the time we hit the shore, the mainland had completely disappeared behind the fog. I remember standing on the rocky beach, looking out at nothing but gray water in every direction, and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, more like the specific awareness that you are very, very small. The first 2 days were uneventful. We worked the shoreline in pairs, logged our data, ate canned food back at the cabin, slept fine. The island was quiet in the way that only totally uninhabited places can be. No traffic, no distant music, no voices, just wind, water, and birds. On the 3rd morning, Chris and I found the second campsite. We weren't looking for it. We were cutting through the interior of the island toward the north shore when Chris almost tripped over a metal stake driven into the ground. We stopped and looked around. There were 4 of them, arranged in a rough rectangle like someone had pitched a tent there and pulled it down. The ground inside the rectangle was compressed and dead, the grass flattened from weight. There were 2 empty tin cans near the tree line, the kind beans or soup come in, and a small fire ring made from stones that had been pulled from the creek nearby. Someone had been here recently. The ash in the fire ring was still pale gray, not dark, and rained on. One of the cans still had moisture inside. Chris and I didn't say much. We took some pictures, went back to the cabin, and told the other 2. Our team lead, a woman named Sarah, got on the sat phone immediately and called the company's main office to ask whether anyone else had authorized access to the island. She stayed on for almost 20 minutes. When she came back inside, she told us the answer was no. No other teams, no contractors, no scheduled maintenance. Nobody should have been on this island except us. Sarah decided we would finish the trip. We were almost halfway done. The weather was holding, and she reasoned that whoever had camped there was likely long gone. Probably some teenager or fisherman who had snuck onto the island for a weekend and left before we arrived. She wasn't wrong to think that. It was a reasonable conclusion, but that night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the top bunk, staring at the wood slats above me, listening to the wind work its way through the cabin's old walls. Something kept pulling at the back of my mind. The cans. The moisture inside the can. That detail wouldn't leave me alone. I got up around 2 in the morning to use the outhouse. The outhouse was maybe 30 feet behind the cabin, just inside the tree line. I took a flashlight, went out the back door, and crossed the clearing. On my way back, I stopped. There was a light on the north end of the island. Not a reflection off the water, not the moon. A steady, dim, yellowish light, low to the ground like a lantern. And it was moving slowly, almost methodically, parallel to the shoreline. I stood there in the dark for probably 30 seconds, completely still, watching it. Then it stopped. I went back inside, woke up Sarah, and pulled her to the back window. We stood there in silence for almost a full minute. The light was gone. She told me I was probably seeing things, that lack of sleep does that, and I almost believed her. The next morning I walked to the North Shore alone while the others worked the Eastern Creek. I told myself I just wanted to check. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. What I found was a dry bag tucked into a crevice between 2 large rocks just above the tide line. A good one, the kind hikers use to keep gear waterproof. It had been wedged deliberately out of sight unless you were close. I crouched down and unzipped it with my gloves on. Inside, 2 energy bar wrappers, a folded tarp, a compact water filter, a small first aid kit, and a spiral notebook. I opened the notebook. Most of it was in shorthand I couldn't read. Abbreviations, times, a lot of numbers that might have been coordinates, but the last 3 pages were written out in full sentences. The handwriting was tight and controlled. I didn't read every word. I read enough. Whoever had been on this island had been watching us. Not in the way you watch animals in the wild, curious and passive. The notes described our schedule. When we left the cabin in the morning, which direction each of us walked, which of us went alone and when. There was a page with 4 names on it. They were not our names, but there were 4 of them. 1 for each of us. I put the notebook back, marked the location on my GPS, and walked back to the cabin without running. I don't know how I managed that. Every part of me wanted to run. We left that afternoon. Sarah made the call without argument the moment I showed her the GPS coordinates and told her what I'd found. We packed in under an hour and got on the boat. The sat phone was used to contact the Coast Guard before we were even halfway back to the mainland. I don't know who was on that island. I don't know if they were still there when we left or if they had already gone. I don't know what the names in that notebook meant or what they were planning. The Coast Guard searched the island 2 days later and found the campsite, the fire ring, the dry bag, but no person. Nobody was ever identified. The case went quiet. The company shut down access to the island permanently, which felt like the only honest acknowledgement that something had actually happened out there. To this day, the part that stays with me isn't the light at 2 a.m. or the notebook or the names. It's the fact that we were out there for 3 days before we found any of it. 3 days of thinking we were alone. Most people think drowning is the worst thing that can happen on the water. They're wrong. My buddy Mike had a boat. Nothing fancy. A 22-foot aluminum fishing vessel he'd had since his dad passed. Every summer, the two of us would take it out on Lake Michigan near the Manitou Islands for a long weekend. Just us, fishing rods, and enough food to last 3 days. No phones, no signal, no people. That was the whole point. The summer I'm talking about, Mike found a spot on the map he'd never noticed before. A small island, not even named on most charts, maybe a 1/4 mile long. He said it had a protected cove on the eastern side that would be perfect for anchoring overnight. I didn't ask questions. Mike knew that lake better than anyone I'd ever met. We left the marina on a Friday morning early. The water was flat and the sky was that deep, clean blue you only get in late July. It took us about 4 hours to reach the island. When it came into view, I remember thinking it looked almost too perfect. Dense pine trees, rocky shoreline, not a single structure visible from the water. We circled it once before pulling into the cove. That's when I noticed the other boat. It was tucked back against the tree line, partially hidden by overhanging branches. Old wooden hull, peeling paint. It looked like it hadn't moved in a long time, but the anchor line going into the water was relatively clean, not algae covered like the hull. Someone had been using it, at least occasionally. Mike said it was probably just an abandoned vessel that someone had tied off there years ago. I wanted to believe that. We anchored maybe 60 feet away from it and started setting up camp on the shore. The first night was perfect. We caught 3 walleye, cooked them over a fire, and went to sleep in our tents by 10. I slept hard. No noise, no wind, nothing. The second day was when things started shifting. We were fishing off the eastern point of the island around noon when Mike went quiet mid-sentence. I looked up at him and he was staring at the tree line. I asked him what was wrong. He said he thought he saw something move in there. I looked. Nothing, just trees and shadow. I told him it was probably a deer. He nodded but didn't say anything else for a while. That evening I went to refill our water container from the small freshwater stream on the island's interior. It wasn't far, maybe 200 yards into the woods from camp. I found the stream, filled the container, and was heading back when I noticed something sitting on a flat rock near the bank. A tin cup. Clean, not rusted, not weathered. Sitting upright like someone had just set it down. I stood there looking at it for longer than I probably should have. Then I picked it up and carried it back to camp. I showed Mike. He turned it over in his hands and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Someone's been here recently." We both looked at the old boat across the cove. The anchor line was the same, nothing had moved. But the feeling between us had shifted. We didn't talk much after that. I woke up at 2 a.m., and I don't know why. No sound, no movement. I just opened my eyes and I was fully awake. The way you sometimes get when something in your brain decides the situation requires your full attention before you've even had a chance to understand why. I lay still in my sleeping bag and listened, and then I heard it. A door. Not a tent zipper, not a branch snapping. The unmistakable sound of a wooden door closing, firm and deliberate, somewhere in the trees behind camp. There was a structure in those woods. Had to be. And someone was inside it. I woke Mike as quietly as I could. I whispered what I'd heard. He grabbed the flashlight and I grabbed the fillet knife, the only real tool we had that could function as a weapon. And we sat there in the dark of Mike's tent for about 20 minutes without moving. Nothing else came, no voices, no footsteps. Just the sound of the water against the rocks and our own breathing. We made a decision without really discussing it. We packed up camp in the dark. Everything went into bags, bags went into the boat, and we pulled anchor and got out of that cove without using our running lights until we were clear of the island. We didn't talk for the first hour on the water. When Mike finally said something, all he said was, "The tin cup." Nobody just leaves a clean cup in the woods. He was right. And I'd been turning that over in my head the entire time. Someone had placed it there recently, and they had to have seen us arrive, seen us set up camp, seen us walking around. They knew we were there the whole time, and they chose to stay hidden. That's the part that I can't let go of, even now. Because there are only a few reasons a person hides on a remote, unnamed island and watches strangers without making a sound. And none of those reasons are good. When we got back to the marina, Mike called the county sheriff's department and told them what we'd found. Gave them the coordinates of the island. An officer told him he'd look into it. We never heard back. I searched local news for weeks. Nothing. I don't know what or who was on that island. I don't know what that structure was or how long whoever was inside had been living there, or what they were doing so far out on a lake with no name on most maps. What I do know is that we were there for almost 2 full days. We swam in that cove, we built fires at night, we slept on that shore, and the whole time we were being watched. I used to love being out on the water. Used to love the idea of finding a place no one else knew about. That feeling is gone now. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. The places that don't show up on maps, the coves that feel too quiet, the islands that look too perfect from a distance, there's usually a reason no one goes there. If you enjoyed these horror stories, hit that subscribe button right now and press the bell icon so you won't miss next scary stories. Drop a comment below, tell me what parts scared you the most. And if you watched this far, hit that like button. I'll see you in the next one.